So the purpose of this video right now is for me to ventilate some things through my own vocal cords in the medium of this setup that I'm attempting. Wonder what that is. Oh, that's from the clothespins that I use to dry my laundry here in New Mexico. Playing with this new tripod. Camera angles, lighting, body position. The lighting's pretty good in the morning right here in this chair. I'm in my Santa Fe casita, day 45-ish. Yeah, 45 exactly, actually. Today's July 31st. Been here since June 15th. I wanted to talk about something I said out loud last night in a conversation. And the whole conversation gave me the experience of how, depending on the witness that we're sharing a story with out loud, body to body, one-on-one, this was 2-on-1, I was talking to a married couple. Depending on how we are received, that space between, that hard to describe sensation of how someone is taking you in based on not only body language, but what questions they ask and how many questions they ask after you share something, how they demonstrate their curiosity, what they're curious about. It shows our nervous system, the way they're processing what we're saying. And so my experience with this was something about this set of witnesses and the person who was asking me the questions. Led me to say something I've said out loud one other time maybe, and I remember it was in my past relationship where nothing I said was really received in any way that I could feel. And so this was the first time I said this particular thing, and then I felt it land, and then it kind of kept going and moving forward, and I got to see where it took me, and I wanted to record that for myself. And the story was the moment I remembered when I was 12-ish, maybe between 10 and 12. I think I was 11 or 12 years old. And my violin teacher, I remember I was standing in the studio as she was talking to my parents. And this would often happen where she turned to my parents and talked, and I was standing there, and then she turned back to me. But this was directed at my parents because she knew that it was their decision, because it would be a family decision. And it was talking about, something about if they wanted to really cultivate the talent that she saw in me, the potential, that one of the things that she would recommend and that she would support us in is to fly to New York and audition for pre-Juilliard type of program, or pre-Curtis kind of a thing, which now I understand what that was, but at the time I didn't know what that was at all. I had maybe heard the word Juilliard, like I had heard the word Harvard when I was 2 years old. These things were talked about in our house a lot. But I remember not being able to say anything. I wasn't asked. I was being talked about, and it was addressed to my parents. And I remember understanding what she was saying. Like, there's a next step here to go into the quote unquote big leagues or to go professional or to be seen by people who can really, make a difference in a career in this field, which was a mystery, right, to me and to my family. Not something on their radar. They had just signed up for like a good violin teacher that they heard about that was 45-minute drive from our house, and it wasn't a career path. I don't even know that they thought it through. I think that what they would say now is like, oh, we wanted you to have a hobby that you could enjoy in your old age. Yeah. Was not a hobbyist school. I did not, and I was not trained in how to even have a hobby, quote unquote, like something you do casually. Everything was like intense seriousness. So I remember them saying, no, she's going to finish her education. She's going to go to, what I heard, like the subtext was, she's going to go to medical school. I already knew that at that time. So there was like a very unspoken, but very specifically felt feeling in our house that everybody was going to be a doctor. That was what we're all going for. After that, whatever, you'll have kids, you'll be married, but like the big hill to climb for those 26 years of life was to get through medical school. And then there was, of course, they didn't realize there was residency fellowship and all that stuff, but it was the push to medical school. Even though it was never said, it's so weird, like it was just assumed. It never had to be said. It was just known. So I think they said, oh, she's going to finish her education. And that was that. It was a close, it was a period at the end of a sentence. And I remember a little bit of the feeling of my teacher kind of wanting to probe and push a little bit, like, are you sure? Like, is the, something you want to even consider? And it was just closed. And there were several moments during the next few years, up until, I was 15, like sophomore, junior year of high school. I think she had taught enough kids to know that that's when people start really focusing on AP classes and SATs and applying to college. And if there was any chance that they were going to go into music, the decision had to be made before then to focus more on auditioning or making that move to prepare physically for your technical skills to be there on the violin versus taking these tests. But there were several moments between age 11 and 15-ish where she tried again to sort of encourage. And I think the last trip that I went on, the last international concert tour I went on at age 14 in 1990 was to Moscow. And I remember my parents being really hesitant about spending the money on the trip. We had to pay for the travel expenses. And then my teacher pulling strings to get my trip paid for. My dad had to pay for his because they wanted me to go with him instead of not with a chaperone. So to get my travel expenses paid for, and then to get a violin borrowed for me for my solo during that trip. And it was an epic trip. I mean, my dad behaved the way that he always did, which was as a charismatic social magnet to everyone, especially women, wherever he goes. And so I was like, in the role that I was in that group, which was, I don't have fun, I don't socialize with people, I have a job to do, which is to nail my solos. Like, this is why I really identify with like figure skaters and gymnasts having to stick their landing. There were multiple things in the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto, the third movement, which is what I performed in Moscow on that trip, that had to be nailed. It was like, I was like really focused on all of the mental and physical preparation, and then rehearsing, extra time rehearsing after the group was done rehearsing with my accompanist, to like feel solid in that and to execute. And I was alone in that. It was just me and my instrument and my hands and my mind and my presence, whatever it was. I wasn't even necessarily aware of the ingredients, but I just knew I had to go very internally and be very serious to focus on that job and get it done. So in that sense, I really can identify with a lot of different athletes that talk about what it takes to do what they're doing, even though I wasn't an athlete in a sport. I was a violin athlete. So I had an epic trip. I had some amazing interactions backstage with like Russian people who I'm performing. I really was able to reflect and write about, I think in one of my college essays, that I was performing the work of their national hero. All it meant to me was like one of the most difficult violin concertos, and I'm like, yeah, nailed it, as my 14-year-old self. But like there were people that came backstage, like somebody gave me a Russian volume of a biography of Tchaikovsky, which, come to think of it, I'm wondering which box that's sitting in my house right now. But it's a blue cloth bound volume with his a photo of him on the front, all in Russian. And then a little girl gave me a clay figurine of a bird that was some kind of folk art from that region, and flowers, and all of these symbols of their gratitude and appreciation. And of course, we don't understand this in America because classical music does not have the stature and the position in daily life that it does all over Europe. In all of the places that I've been on concert tour, France, Germany, Portugal, Italy, Czech Republic, and the former Soviet Union. So this was before the coup. So this was the USSR at the time. It's like, it's their anthem, it's their lifeblood, it's a soul music. And so for me, this little Taiwanese American 14-year-old coming to play in Moscow that work, I don't know that my teacher considered the gravitas of that, and nor did I. Maybe that was good. But someone later said that Boris Yeltsin might have been in the audience for at least part of that experience, of that performance. I don't know. So there was like a potentially epic, life-changing experience for me, which obviously I still carry with me 40 plus years later, about the power of this connection across the world. It's a great story. I mean, it was real, but it didn't deter the familial mission to go to medical school. So, I mean, this is very deeply seated in my cure. I don't have answers about why my parents, along with so many other Taiwanese people of that generation, were obsessed with they themselves and their children becoming doctors if at all possible. There's a deification of medical doctors. I mean, I took East Asian Studies history class in college to try to understand whether it was like the Japanese colonial influence on Taiwanese people at that time, where they were only allowed to advance in society because they couldn't be in government positions, that they could only be doctors to reach like that level of status. I had all these theories. I wanted to know why, because I looked around me at all of my peers of Taiwanese, Chinese Taiwanese mainly descent. And it's like we all had this programming. We had to be doctors or we're something less than ideal. And many of my peers from the small town in Illinois where I grew up did become doctors and were musicians and athletes, but it was always about being a doctor. And I really would love to interview them now if they have any reflections on how that affected them, how that reflected their actual personhood, and if they got to explore or had any curiosity about what was beyond that or what was underneath that. Many of these ones that I'm thinking of were male, So I don't know. I think there's a difference in impact with like a male Taiwanese American becoming a doctor, like does give them some status in the United States as well. That's probably beneficial. But as a woman, as a female Asian American, forced to be a doctor and then like also forced to probably give that up to have children, to marry another doctor and like raise his children, like how that all played out in terms of like cutting off certain pathways of exploration and self-discovery. I'm pausing because I want to practice like not letting certain thought spirals take me away too much, but that was clearly one of them. So back to this moment where at 12, my teacher said this. At 14, she tried to, encourage one more time by like, she was the one who asked for the donation to get my travel money paid so that my parents didn't have a reason to keep me from going. She got the violin, and maybe she thought, now that I'm thinking about it, that magical experience might ignite something. I don't think she appreciated how little voice I had in insisting upon anything for myself at that time in my life, in my family, and how little of a difference it made, how many great experiences I had on violin, that they were so dead set and programmed on giving their children this education. They were very, very happy to pay for all college and medical school tuition because it was their project. And and speaking of, why I want to practice saying this, it's all very dangerous for me to say this for the inner child in me, because I'm supposed to be grateful. I'm not supposed to complain about any of this, because who else gets to have their tuition paid for? So, yeah, I understand that, and that can be processed outside of this conversation, but I'm speaking about my experience from my perspective, that it wasn't like I really asked for it, really wanted this, and this was a dream of mine, and this was something in me to do. It was a form of manipulation and coercion, that like they would pay for things if they agreed and they wanted me to do them. But if I wanted to step off that path, the money was also used as a tool to induce their will, because if they pulled the plug on my money, which actually happened freshman year when I was at Harvard, and said, actually mustered quite a bit of courage to call home and talk to my dad, who I thought was the ally, and say, I'm very excited. I figured it out, how to be both pre-med and satisfy you, and do something I really discovered I'm good at. I like it. It's actually easy for me. I enjoy it, and I can do it, which was French history and literature, late 17th, early 18th century. So it was very specific. I had discovered this period of time in two different classes I took, one in art history, one in French literature, during my freshman year. So I was like in a junior level French literature class my freshman year. And I realized I could do this. I'm sitting there and I'm doing it. I'm writing papers in French. I'm listening to lectures in French. I'm reading one novel a week in French. I can do it. Whereas I'm sitting there struggling along with a lot of other classmates. And well, some of them it was as easy for them to do organic chemistry as it was for me to do French literature. But I was struggling through organic chemistry because it's a family tradition to take organic chemistry. Everybody did it. My mom did it, my dad did it, my brother did it, now you do it. And so I was like doing this rite of passage, but I'm like, I don't care. I'm doing it because apparently I have to, but there's this other thing they don't understand called history and literature. I didn't know it existed until I went to Harvard either. And I was like, oh, I want to do that. And when I told him, and now I realize this was my naivete and what my brother would call stupidity, in telling people, like my parents, things that are kind of not fully formed and kind of asking for permission versus just doing it. So I remember calling home before I declared, my major. So I was always asking for permission to exist. And my dad saying, I won't pay for that. And he said, I'm not paying for you to read books. You can read books when you're retired. You need to do science when you're at Harvard. And so I guess was frozen and stunned. I didn't have an answer to that because I wasn't well versed in talking back to my parents about big things like this. I was used to just kind of harboring resentment and being generally irritable on a daily basis while doing what they wanted me to do. So yeah, I remember I shut that down. I shut the dream down. I shut my own desire down. I said, okay, if you're not going to pay for it, it wasn't logic. I am now applying the logic to it now, 40 years later. But at the time, it literally I just closed the door to the French literature. I kept taking the classes, but I abandoned all plans of trying to do that as a major. So I was on the outside looking in to a world that I had the opportunity to go into. Nobody was keeping me from it except my dad's verbal threats and my own cowardice. And then I declared myself a biochemical sciences major with advanced standing, like all these other kids around me at Harvard were doing. None of them really wanted to either. Many of them were in the same path, being expected to be doctors, and they became doctors, and they had their families, and maybe their kids will be doctors. But I knew the whole time, one, I didn't really want to be a doctor, but I knew I had to. That was my one last marching order in life. I had to find a way to get through the next 8 years. At the time, I didn't consider that I couldn't do a residency, which is what I ended up doing. But I was okay, 8 years, my conscription. And I'm going to breathe. So I did it. I finished my degree with honors in biochemical sciences. There were so many times along the way that I knew I dreaded the application process to medical school because I felt like I was lying in my applications. And I sat through so many interviews where I felt like I was lying about wanting to be a doctor. It's I could be, but to muster the genuine answer about why I really wanted to do it just wasn't there. And I think in some interviews that really came through, and some interviewers really perceived that. And then I sort of slipped by a bunch of other ones and got into I got into more than one medical school. I don't remember even which ones because I didn't care. I just had to choose. It's just pick one. And then I didn't want to write a thesis. I remember meeting with the dean of the biochemical sciences program and just pleading with him, can I do the non-thesis option for honors? What can I take? And he's just do the thesis. So again, he was just just pick one. He was another voice of that same kind of institutional thinking that wasn't going to listen to me as an individual. Didn't care what I wanted. It was just do it. We don't, just shut up. So again, I'm coming back to why it's important to ventilate through my vocal cords. It's because so many micro moments along the way, I was told explicitly and implicitly, shut up. We don't really care what you think or feel or what you want to say. Just do it. Just pick one. And I know that there's so many people on this planet still living in that reality. And I'm not. And, I'm going to be asked to apologize for that or whatever, but I have also crossed the threshold of not caring about that anymore in my life. And what I realize is it's not about not caring what anyone out there hearing this is saying, as much as caring more about me as a person, that I wasn't actually given that type of regard and interest in my experience. So this comes back to last night. fast forwarding to right now, the experience of speaking with these two people who have no reason to be interested in me. They're strangers. I mean, at best, it just is it's a business transaction. But they actually have a genuine human curiosity about me as another human. And I felt that. It was kind of amazing because it wasn't like this like affectionate love kind of thing. It was just a space to kind of explore a little bit like I'm doing now. Like, what was that? And why was that? And how do you feel about that? And did this affect you? Do you still feel this? It was this beautiful, you might call it a therapeutic conversation, even though they were not therapists in any way, shape, or form, but it was a therapeutic experience to just be shown some interest in my experience as it's unfolding. And it wasn't prepared. It wasn't like I wasn't planning to have this conversation. And it's interesting to just feel how, for me, the critic and the essential self are right next to each other. As soon as I say something true, I'm aware of all the caveats I have to say to address the critic. All the apologies that I have to owe to all the people who are going to be offended by what I say. I'm aware of that, like in this setting with this video. Not so much last night, because the people were not of the same, they were not Taiwanese American or Chinese American at all, but they knew a lot of different types of immigrant Americans in their lifetime. So they were sort of like aware of different types of stories. So coming back to last night, I wanted to say, what I was able to connect was that my 12-year-old self, in the moment of witnessing my teacher ask my parents if they would consider bringing me to New York to just do an audition, and then saying no flat out at that moment, without a discussion, without any thought, without any, not even like, let's think about that. That's interesting. Wow, we didn't realize that was possible, or that she would be in contention. None of that. It was like, nope, she's going to be a doctor. I think what I was able to say last night is like my 12-year-old mind made 3 conclusions. It was confusing because I wasn't asked. It was like I was witnessing this. I wasn't being asked, but I was being talked about, and a decision was being made for me in my life. Now I realize how big that decision was, and I was too young to make it alone. But also, if there were any kind of access to emotional resources in my family to have discussions, which there was 0, it might have been an interesting moment. So my 12-year-old mind, on its own, without discussion, because we never talked about it again. Like, it's not like my parents sat me down and said, this is what we decided. There was no discussion. I don't even think there was a debate between my parents. Maybe internally they would say that now, but I think they just completely dismissed that in the moment. But my 12-year-old mind, I think, in that moment made 3 conclusions to try to make sense of this. One was, maybe I'm not good enough. Or 2, maybe they're afraid of finding out one way or the other, right? Because if you do the audition, then you get an answer, and then you have to sort of do something with that information. So it's a risk. So there was some reason that risk was not acceptable. That's what I was trying to make sense of. Like, why is this not okay? So obviously, they're making a very quick, clear conclusion that, nope, this is a no. So I'm trying to make sense of, okay, what what are we saying no to? Why is it so quick? Why is it so clear? It's not being explained to me. Because at that time, I've been in competitions, I've been performing my whole life. Like, it would just be more of the same. Like, I didn't understand what the sacrifice would be. 3, and the third one was, maybe it's really dangerous to get it. Like, what if you get the audition? What if you actually are given the opportunity to make it in the big leagues and be a musician? And I think that third one still stays with me. That's the deepest programming. It goes very much hand in hand with, you will never make a living as an artist. And then, like, the way that my parents would address this issue later on would be like, it's too hard. And then they would find examples of other, even professional musicians, who would also say, don't tell your kids to be a musician, it's too hard. Like, there's people in every profession that will say this, like doctors and anything, small business owners. Don't go into this, it's too hard. And so now I see what that's about, which has nothing to do with anyone other than the person saying it. But I think that that's a very deep ingrained message that's still in me, or a warning that comes in, like, what happens? There's no answer. It's just a big question mark. It's an unknown that was so fearful that I was led away from it, sharp turn away, don't even consider it. And then, as I went on in life, as the decades passed, and I saw more people who were my peers growing up, who made different decisions along the way to do the auditions and to go into music and to actually make a living and actually be performing. And they were my peers at like a skill level that was definitely within my reach, if not even like I was beyond them in terms of talent or whatever. That's been painful for me to watch. And that's what I said last night for the first time out loud. I was like, that has been painful for me to watch. That has been a knot in my own musical experience, to like watch people I grew up with who were at or below my level of talent become professional musicians in major symphony orchestras around the world and as soloists. It's not jealousy, but it's just like a sense of grief of like what the internal landscape of my family did to me. And I wonder, how wide that impact goes. And I think that that's why ultimately that curiosity has led to studying a lot of counseling psychology and like family system psychology and historical trauma and intergenerational trauma and all that stuff, because of that's the deepest question. It has many branches. The tree of the one story that I just told has many branches. It's not just that one incident, but it's a very insidiously illustrative example of the oppression of voice and fear of the unknown that was so deep, became so normalized, and still is with me after many decades of work in letting go and releasing and untangling some of these knots. But I was able to see that, and by having this conversation just last night. So how do I feel now? About 30 minutes into sharing this on a video camera that could be posted. It's interesting to be able to say it all without getting super hyped up inside. There were some moments here where I got a little bit activated. I was able to notice it, pause, take a breath, regather. But I say it because, I know that I feel like at this age, since I've passed this threshold of 50, I realize my time is finite. suddenly I realize it's always been finite, but like now it feels like very real that the number of years that I will be able to be here and do and say certain things is finite. And we're also at a time where our thoughts are being constrained by whatever these robots are able to read off of existing texts. And so I think part of this process for me is just saying things that have always been in me and practicing with the discomfort of knowing that someone else is going to hear it, that you're going to have a different reaction to it. It's going to land with some people and not. It's going to stir up some things that are different with everybody, and just to sit with that. And so that's really what I'm trying to do for myself by saying this. It's no longer about like trying to make some conclusion that can then teach you some kind of a lesson in your life. Not about that at all. It's really I'm recognizing the value of just hearing a story from a real person as it unfolds, as if you're sitting with them, and how rare those opportunities are. That's it.